Here we are with a deep dive into material that is profoundly difficult, really. We're looking at a report, several reports actually, detailing a recent tragic event, the deaths of three young sisters, Paityn, Evelyn, and Olivia Decker, out in Chelan County, Washington.
Yeah, it's an incredibly heart-wrenching case, and our aim today is to guide you through the key information that's presented in the sources we've gathered.
Yes, we're pulling from a collection of articles, investigative reports, court documents, quite a bit related to this incident. And our mission, really, is to distill the most important facts, try to understand the timeline as it unfolded, delve into the backgrounds of the people involved.
And ultimately sort of understand what this collection of information tells us about how this tragedy occurred, and, crucially, where the situation stands right now.
It is sensitive material, absolutely. We're approaching this with the gravity it deserves.
Right.
The goal isn't just to recount facts, but to try and understand the nuances, extract those crucial nuggets of insight from what are often complex details, and really grasp the full weight of what happened.
And according to the information we have, this all began with what should have been a pretty routine, planned visitation, one that tragically went terribly, terribly wrong.
A seemingly ordinary exchange that just spiraled into an unimaginable loss, as the sources lay it out.
Yeah.
Let's start by focusing on the victims themselves. The three young lives at the center of this. The sources introduce us to the three sisters. Paityn, she was the oldest, just 9 years old. Evelyn was 8, and Olivia, the youngest, she was only 5.
It's devastating just saying those ages out loud.
It truly is. And the reports, they specify they lived in Wenatchee, Washington. They were all students at Lincoln Elementary School.
Right. Paityn was in 3rd grade, Evelyn in 2nd, and little Olivia was just starting out in kindergarten. And from everything we've read, they were active, vibrant kids in their community.
And it wasn't just school that was central to their lives, was it?
No, not at all. The sources really highlight their involvement in the local arts scene. Specifically, they participated in the Music Theater of Wenatchee's Short Shakespeareans program.
That detail, it really helps paint a picture, doesn't it, of who they were beyond just names in a report.
It makes them real, and the sources, they convey how the community remembered them, drawing directly from statements made by people who knew them. They're consistently described as shining stars, whose joy, creativity, and spirit lit up our stage and our hearts. That's a direct quote.
That language is incredibly poignant, and it really underscores why looking at these details, even in such a difficult report, is so important.
Absolutely.
These weren't abstract victims. They were active, loved members of a community, involved in school, involved in the arts. Thinking about that just makes the depth of the loss so much more acute. You can only imagine the ripple effect, the impact on their classmates, their teachers, their fellow performers in that theater group, their friends, every single person they touched. It's a loss that is deeply, deeply felt by so many.
Precisely. It grounds the tragedy in the human reality of their lives and their sudden, violent absence.
Okay, let's unpack how this situation first came to light, according to the timeline laid out in the sources we have. The sequence of events seems to begin on Friday, May 30th, 2025.
Right. This was a scheduled day for the girls to have a visitation with their father, Travis Decker. He was supposed to pick them up at 5:00 p.m.
And the first indication that something was seriously amiss, as the sources document it, was a significant departure from the established routine.
Yeah, Travis Decker failed to return the girls at the stipulated time that evening. That time was set for 8:00 p.m.
Their mother, Whitney Decker, immediately sensed something wasn't right. The report indicates her attempts to contact Travis went directly to voicemail. And what stands out from the sources is that this wasn't typical. Up to this point, even with existing challenges, he apparently hadn't failed to return the girls on time during his scheduled visitations.
That's a really critical piece of information the reports emphasize. This wasn't just a minor delay or, a late text message. It was a complete lack of communication and a failure to adhere to the established court-ordered schedule.
Right. And this deviation, coupled with her pre-existing concerns, it prompted her to act pretty quickly.
Yes, the information shows she reported the girls missing to the Wenatchee Police Department at 9:45 p.m. that same evening, just under 2 hours after they were due back.
And her concerns were more specific than just the lateness, as the sources document them.
They were. When she reported them missing, she articulated specific worries documented in the report, his uncharacteristic lack of communication, which was, like you said, unusual for him regarding visitations, and crucially, his reported struggles with mental health. For her, this combination, the silence and his known issues, it signaled a critical deviation from the norm and a potential danger.
So, based on this report, what were the initial steps taken by the police when she made that call?
Well, law enforcement immediately initiated efforts to locate Travis Decker and his vehicle. The reports specify they were looking for a 2017 white GMC Sierra pickup truck. They had the Washington license plate number D2165C.
Okay.
They began checking local motels, other potential locations in the Wenatchee and East Wenatchee area where he was known to sometimes stay or frequent, given his situation.
And there was some early technological assistance in tracing his movements, too, wasn't there?
Yes, the Flock database, that's a network of license plate reader cameras, it provided some early tracking information. It showed his truck traveling westbound on Highway 2 earlier that same day on Friday.
So that gave investigators at least a direction to travel, suggesting he was moving away from Wenatchee towards the mountains, maybe?
Exactly, but it didn't provide a precise location later in the evening or confirm his movements after that initial ping, just a general direction.
Okay, now here's where the information from the sources highlights a point that, looking back, feels incredibly significant and raises some complex questions. The report details the initial decision regarding an Amber Alert.
Right. A request was made for one, but it was denied at that time.
And why was that? What reason was given in the sources?
Well, the criteria for issuing an Amber Alert are quite specific. They require a belief, based on evidence, that the child is at risk of serious bodily injury or death immediately.
Mm-hmm.
The reason cited in the sources for the initial denial was that at that specific moment, there was, and I quote, no current evidence to believe the children were at risk of serious bodily injury or death, according to those strict criteria.
Let's analyze this denial based on what the sources tell us about the situation right then. The mother's immediate concern, as documented, it was triggered not just by the lateness and lack of response,
Right.
but specifically by combining those factors with her knowledge of Travis's mental health issues and how uncharacteristic his behavior was. This combination, for her, it signaled a critical deviation that felt dangerous.
And what's, kind of fascinating here, looking at the system's response, is how those Amber Alert criteria are applied in situations involving custodial disputes, especially when there are known, but maybe not immediately verifiable factors like a parent's mental health challenges or a significant unexplained deviation from a court order.
Yeah.
The denial, based on needing evidence of immediate serious risk, it suggests maybe a potential limitation in assessing how quickly danger can escalate in these complex family cases.
It does raise an important question for us and for you listening.
Yeah.
How can systems designed for these urgent public alerts better integrate known risk factors, like documented mental health struggles, or a parent's sudden, unexplained failure to follow a court order, especially when that behavior is really out of character? It seems the mother's intuitive sense of danger, based on her history with him and his behavior that night, was a crucial early signal that the initial alert system, based on its criteria, didn't really capture.
Yeah, her concerns, informed by that personal history and this specific departure from the norm, they tragically proved to be accurate indicators of escalating danger. The formal criteria, as they were applied initially, didn't fully account for the speed at which this situation apparently deteriorated.
Okay, so moving into Saturday, May 31st, 2025, the day after they went missing. The situation did escalate slightly in terms of the official response, based on the sources.
Yes, on Saturday, the Washington State Patrol issued an endangered missing person alert. Now, this is a different level of alert than an Amber Alert.
Right.
The fact that it was issued indicates that Wenatchee detectives were able to provide some additional information that met the criteria for this specific alert. It suggests a heightened level of concern, definitely, but still perhaps not meeting that explicit, serious bodily injury or death threshold required for an Amber Alert at that precise moment.
And search efforts continue to expand, right? With other agencies getting involved.
That's right. Investigators, now working with assistance from the FBI, started developing information that led them to believe Travis and the girls were likely still within Chelan County.
Okay, so that was a key development, helping narrow the potential search area significantly compared to, say, the possibility they might have left the state.
Exactly. And by Monday, June 2nd, 2025, so just 2 full days later, the focus of the search had become even more specific based on the information investigators had gathered.
Where were they focusing?
By Monday, the search area was specifically narrowed down to a region near Leavenworth. This is a mountainous area, roughly 10 to 12 miles west of Wenatchee. They were focusing on the vicinity between Icicle Road and Chumstick Road.
That level of geographic focus, it implies investigators were really honing in on a likely location. Maybe based on intelligence, phone data, sightings, something.
It seems likely. The public reports don't detail exactly how they narrowed it down, but it suggests they had leads pointing them strongly to that specific rural mountainous area.
And before the grim discovery was actually made, legal steps had already been taken based just on his failure to return the girls.
Yes, a warrant had been obtained for Travis Decker's arrest. At this point in the investigation, before the tragic discovery, the charges were based on the violation of the parenting plan.
Which was what?
3 counts of first-degree custodial interference. This reflects the legal status of the case before everything changed. It was initially being treated as a serious parental abduction case based on the established facts, the missed return time, the lack of contact.
Okay, here's where the situation takes the most devastating turn, as recounted in the sources. The turning point came later, on Monday, June 2nd.
Yes. At approximately 3:45 p.m. on Monday afternoon, a Chelan County Forest Service deputy, likely assisting in those expanded search efforts in that remote area, located Travis Decker's unoccupied vehicle, the white GMC Sierra.
And the specific location of that vehicle, as detailed in the reports, it seems crucial to understanding the isolation of what happened next.
It really is. It was found near the Rock Island campground. The reports specify it was about 17 miles up Icicle Road.
Wow.
If you know that area, or even just picture it, that's a very remote, heavily forested, mountainous region. It's far from any towns or major roads. Finding the truck there, empty, immediately raised the alarm bells and focused search efforts intensely on that specific spot.
And the discovery of the girls' bodies followed shortly after the vehicle was found.
Yes, tragically. Following the discovery of the unoccupied truck, an extensive and urgent search of the immediate surrounding area was launched. And it was within that remote vicinity that investigators located the bodies of the 3 missing girls.
Oh, God.
And crucially, according to the reports from the scene, Travis Decker himself was not found in the area at that time.
Law enforcement response at that point must have escalated dramatically.
Instantly. The discovery triggered a massive multi-agency response right there on Icicle Road. The East Cascade SWAT team, the ECST, was activated and deployed to the area to conduct a thorough search for Travis Decker, treating him now as a highly dangerous fugitive.
Right.
And simultaneously, the Washington State Patrol Crime Scene Response Team, CSRT, was requested. Their job was to process the extremely difficult and sensitive scene where the bodies were found, meticulously collecting evidence, and also to conduct a full forensic search of Decker's abandoned vehicle.
And at that point, the endangered missing persons alert for the girls was, heartbreakingly, it was canceled.
It was canceled. And simultaneously, the legal status and the charges against Travis Decker shifted immediately and drastically.
From custodial interference to what?
He became wanted on new, much more serious charges: 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of first-degree kidnapping.
The sources highlight this rapid reclassification, don't they?
They do. The legal systems shift from custodial interference to first-degree murder and kidnapping, essentially within hours of finding the girls.
Yeah.
It signifies the profound change in the understanding of what had occurred.
Yeah.
It directly reflects the severity of finding the girls deceased and the immediate identification of Travis Decker as the perpetrator based on the circumstances, his failure to return them, his vehicle being found at that remote location, and the discovery of their bodies there. It's a reclassification that just underscores the tragic outcome and his alleged direct responsibility.
Moving on, there's a critical and deeply disturbing detail that emerged later regarding the manner of death reported in the sources.
Yes. Initially, when the news of the discovery first broke, public statements from law enforcement were very careful. They didn't disclose the specific cause or manner of death, citing the ongoing investigation and the sensitivities.
Understandable.
But court documents that were subsequently obtained by local media, specifically KIR7, as cited in the sources we have, they provided that crucial, horrific piece of information.
Which was?
According to those court documents, law enforcement stated that the girls all likely died of asphyxiation.
Okay, let's delve into the significance of that finding. Asphyxiation. That's not something that happens accidentally in this context, right?
No. What makes this detail particularly chilling, as conveyed in the source material, is what it implies about the nature of the act itself. Asphyxiation is death caused by lack of oxygen. In the context of a homicide, especially involving children, it implies a direct physical act. Meaning it requires close proximity, physical contact with the victim, and the application of sustained force to obstruct their breathing.
It suggests a deeply personal, intimate and violent act, one that involves being physically very close to the victims in their final moments.
Exactly. It contrasts sharply with methods that might be more remote or indirect. It reinforces the severity and brutality of the murder charges, and it aligns directly with the kidnapping charge, implying he had direct physical control over the girls when these acts occurred.
This detail. It feels crucial for understanding the brutal reality of the crime, as presented in the reports. It moves beyond just a general term like homicide and describes the specific physical mechanism of their deaths.
Right. It leaves no ambiguity about the perpetrator's direct involvement and the horrific nature of their final moments, according to that information from the court documents.
Now, let's turn our attention to Travis Decker himself, his background, his profile, based on the information available in the sources.
Okay. The sources provide some basic identifying information that's obviously crucial for the ongoing search. He's 32 years old, described as 5 feet 8 inches tall, 190 pounds, black hair, brown eyes, last seen wearing a light-colored shirt and dark shorts.
But a significant and repeatedly emphasized part of his profile, highlighted by law enforcement, is his military background.
Yes, this is a key aspect that authorities are really warning the public about. The sources state he is a former military member and possesses extensive training.
What kind of training?
More specifically, he was an airborne paratrooper, so trained in parachute operations, and critically, he earned an elite Ranger tab.
That Ranger tab is something the sources specifically call out. What does that signify in military terms, and why is law enforcement emphasizing it so much?
Earning the Ranger tab means completing Ranger School. It's one of the toughest leadership courses in the U.S. Army. It focuses heavily on small unit tactics. Patrolling requires exceptional physical and mental endurance.
Okay.
And it also includes specialized training in survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, often called SEER training, particularly those evasion and survival skills in challenging environments.
And there was something about social media.
Yeah, one social media profile attributed to him apparently claimed he qualified as an instructor at the U.S. Army's National Guard Warrior Training Center. Now, the source doesn't explicitly confirm this instructor status, but it highlights his connection with advanced training environments.
How did his military career end or transition before this incident?
He transferred from the active component, the full-time Army, to the Washington National Guard back in 2021. According to the sources, at the time of this incident, he was actually pending a disciplinary discharge from the National Guard.
For what?
For not showing up to his required monthly drills. Apparently his last attended drill was about a year prior to these events.
Let's analyze why law enforcement is putting such a strong emphasis on this military background, particularly the Ranger training, when they're warning the public that he may pose a significant risk and should not be approached.
It strongly indicates that authorities perceive his specialized training as directly enhancing his ability to evade capture. Someone with Ranger training is specifically skilled in wilderness survival, navigation in difficult terrain, and potentially evading search efforts.
Especially in that kind of remote forested area where his truck was found.
Exactly. They believe these skills mean he is highly capable of remaining hidden and could potentially be dangerous if confronted. It necessitates extreme caution from the public and requires specialized search teams with their own tactical skills.
And the pending disciplinary discharge, does the source material suggest that might be relevant somehow?
Well, his pending discharge for non-attendance. It could be interpreted, within the context of the sources, as maybe suggesting a pattern of disengagement from structure and authority. Or perhaps it's an indicator of struggles that were already impacting his ability to meet commitments. This non-compliance with military obligations might correlate, in a broader sense, with his subsequent non-compliance with court orders in the custody case, which we'll get into.
What was his living situation like leading up to this, according to the sources?
The reports indicate that at the time of the incident, Travis Decker was reportedly homeless. He was living a transient lifestyle, either out of that white GMC Sierra pickup truck or rotating between various hotels, motels, or even campgrounds in the area. This lack of stable housing is a key piece of his recent profile.
And his ex-wife, Whitney Decker, she had made observations about his mental state that are documented in the sources, right?
Yes. She stated in an interview cited in the reports that Travis had really struggled since he left the military with his mental health. She described him as being impulsive.
But did she think he was dangerous?
Initially, she had stated she didn't feel he was dangerous, even with the impulsivity. That seems to have been her assessment earlier on.
But her concerns about his mental health and stability, they escalated significantly, particularly as documented in the court filings related to the custody dispute.
They certainly did. The court documents from September 2024, which is less than a year before the deaths, reveal a much higher level of concern from her. When she filed for a change to the parenting plan, she specifically cited his long-term emotional or physical problem that gets in the way of his ability to parent.
And the court itself, based on the information presented, made formal findings supporting her concerns. It wasn't just her word.
No, the court formally found limiting factors of neglect and emotional physical problems against Travis. That's significant. It was a judicial finding based on evidence presented during those custody proceedings.
So if we connect the dots from the source material, his reported struggles post-military seem to have contributed to homelessness and instability,
Right.
which then directly impacted his parenting capacity, leading to formal concerns expressed by the mother and then findings by the court.
Exactly. The court findings and the subsequent orders in the custody case explicitly underscore a recognized and legally documented decline in his overall well-being and his ability to provide stable care for the children. And his documented noncompliance with the subsequent court orders, which we definitely need to talk about, suggests a potential denial or maybe inability to address these issues, which could have just compounded his struggles.
And you have to think, what challenges does this specific background, the combination of specialized military training, potential mental health struggles, homelessness, pose for law enforcement trying to locate and apprehend him in that rugged terrain right now? It creates a really unique and complex profile for a fugitive.
It absolutely does.
Okay, let's move on to the escalating custody dispute itself. The sources trace this conflict as a really deeply rooted factor leading up to the tragedy.
Yeah, the sources state that Travis and Whitney Decker were divorced after about 7 years of marriage. And initially, the divorce itself was described by Whitney as having been civil.
And in the early stages, or perhaps during the initial parenting plan formulation, she didn't express concerns about major issues like abuse or neglect.
Not according to the sources, no. Although she did apparently mention some moments of power or control he used during the marriage, the major red flags weren't raised initially in that context.
And it's also documented that generally the girls reportedly had a good relationship with Decker and enjoy their time with him.
Right. And as we noted, the reports also state that he had not failed to return them on time before this specific incident.
Which makes the sudden tragic deviation from the norm on May 30th even more stark and, I guess, unexpected from the perspective of their prior interactions.
Definitely. However, things began to significantly shift and escalate less than a year before the deaths, starting around September 2024.
That's when Whitney's concerns grew to the point where she took formal legal action.
Exactly. According to the sources, she filed for a major change in the parenting schedule. The legal basis for this was citing a substantial change in one parent's situation, pointing specifically to Travis's increasing lack of stability.
And she made specific, detailed allegations in her court filings to support this request for a change.
She did. She formally alleged in the court documents that he had neglected his parental duties towards a child, and, as we mentioned before, that he had a long-term emotional or physical problem that gets in the way of his ability to parent. These were serious accusations being presented formally to the court.
And the sources detail specific incidents she cited in these court documents to illustrate her concerns, right? Can you walk us through those?
Yeah, these incidents, presented to the court as evidence, they paint a really troubling picture of her observations of his parenting and living situation at the time. For instance, on August 30, 2023, she alleged Travis didn't want the girls this weekend, even though it was his weekend. He reportedly told her the girls walk on eggshells because of how he reprimands the dogs, which suggests, an emotionally tense environment for the children. Then there was a particularly disturbing incident cited from December 19th, 2023. Whitney stated Olivia, the youngest, FaceTimed her screaming, crying, and Travis was apparently nowhere in sight. Paityn, the oldest sister, had to go find him.
Oh, wow.
Whitney later learned the girls had been sleeping in an armory like a military building, and Olivia had smashed her fingers while playing on some kind of lay pull-down machine, totally unattended. Travis reportedly wasn't comforting her when she got hurt, and both girls were crying uncontrollably when Whitney finally spoke to them.
That sounds like lack of supervision, an injury, and significant emotional distress, all in a potentially really inappropriate living situation.
Exactly. And then another one, July 25, 2024. She cited an incident where Travis apparently hitchhiked to her house, was 3 hours late for a scheduled pickup, and then asked if he could stay in her basement with the girls. He apparently implied that if he didn't, some stranger would have to pick them up from whatever activity they were at.
Again, just highlighting significant instability and maybe poor planning involving the kids.
Right. Relying on others, lateness, lack of stable place. It all paints a picture.
So those specific examples documented in the court filings are powerful.
Yeah.
What happened during the court proceedings that stemmed from Whitney's request back in September 2024?
Well, during the proceedings on September 27, 2024, Whitney's attorney presented these concerns forcefully to the court. They specifically highlighted Travis's homelessness and that incident where the children were reportedly sleeping in an armory around dozens of other men.
Okay.
Based on all this, the attorney explicitly requested that Travis's overnight visits cease entirely until he could demonstrate he had safe and appropriate housing for the girls.
And how did Travis Decker respond to these concerns and the request for a change of the parenting plan when he was in court? What was his position?
According to the sources, he objected to the proposed changes. He stated that he enjoyed camping with the children and believed he actually had more time available to spend with them since he had voluntarily left full-time active Army duty. He also acknowledged his inability to pay the court-ordered child support, but apparently stated he felt it was important for the children to see how the world works from his current condition.
That response, as described, it suggests maybe a significant disconnect between his perspective and the court's focus on stability and safety, almost a rationalization of his situation.
It could be seen that way, kind of reframing his instability as a life lesson, perhaps, but the court didn't see it that way.
So what was the court's ruling based on the evidence presented?
The court ultimately sided with Whitney and her proposed plan, and crucially, the court made those formal findings supporting the mother's concerns. They officially found limiting factors of neglect and emotional physical problems against Travis. That judicial recognition is key. His issues were seen as negatively impacting his ability to parent safely and stably.
And based on these formal findings, the court issued specific requirements and significantly modified the parenting plan.
Yes, absolutely. As a direct result of these findings, Travis was explicitly ordered by the court to undergo mandatory evaluations, an anger management, domestic violence evaluation, and a full psychiatric evaluation by a licensed psychiatrist to include any potential diagnoses.
And these evaluations were prerequisites for potentially changing the restrictions on his visits later.
That seems to be the implication, yes. And the visitation schedule itself was drastically altered in the meantime.
How so?
His visitation rights were significantly restricted. He was limited to essentially supervised or very limited unsupervised visits every other weekend with specific hours. Fridays, 5 p.m. to 8 p.m., Saturdays, 11 a.m. to 7 p.m., and Sundays, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m.
Right.
Critically, overnight visits were strictly prohibited, and all visitation time was restricted geographically just to the Wenatchee Valley area. These were really substantial restrictions compared to whatever arrangement had been in place before, reflecting the court's very serious concerns.
And how did Travis respond to these mandatory court orders and this new, much more restrictive parenting plan?
Well, according to court documents cited in the sources, Travis refused to sign the parental modification form, the document that formally laid out the new court order.
He just wouldn't sign.
Refused. And perhaps even more significantly, the sources indicate he did not comply with the court's explicit orders to seek the required mental health, domestic violence, or anger management counseling and evaluations. He just didn't do it.
Analyzing the sequence presented in the sources, this documented pattern of escalating concern from the mother, formal court intervention based on those concerns, specific requirements set by the court, and then Travis's clear noncompliance with those orders. It really points to a severe breakdown, doesn't it? Both in the system's ability to enforce safety measures and his willingness to address the issues.
It really does. The unaddressed conflict, his increasing instability documented through those incidents, the court formalizing the concerns with significant restrictions, and then his subsequent refusal to comply with mandated interventions. All of this suggests, a profound sense of maybe frustration, resentment, or desperation, likely fueled by his perceived loss of control over his children and his life situation.
The sources seem to suggest this unaddressed stress conflict and perceived loss of control, exacerbated by his noncompliance and likely mental health struggles, that this could have been the precipitating factor for the extreme act.
That's the implication drawn from the analysis. This pattern where a parent acts violently during or after a contentious custody dispute, sometimes viewing the children almost as objects or extensions of themselves. It's a recognized, the absolutely horrifying dynamic in some family tragedies.
And you think about that sequence. Escalating concern, formal court intervention identifying risks,
Yeah.
mandatory steps required for safety, and then the individual's refusal to engage with those steps. Where did the points of failure lie? And what could potentially be learned from this documented progression to identify and perhaps mitigate such risks in future cases? It's a tough question.
A very tough question with no easy answers, but one the sources compel us to ask.
Let's shift now to potential motives and, critically, the chilling evidence of premeditation that emerged from the investigation, as detailed in the sources.
Right. Based on the information presented, the primary alleged motive appears to be inextricably linked to that escalating conflict over custody and his perceived loss of control over his daughters. His documented instability, his noncompliance with court orders that were increasingly restricting his access, and the formal findings against him by the court all likely played a central role in whatever drove him to commit this alleged act.
And the sources suggest how he might have viewed the children within the context of this conflict.
Yes, the analysis in the report raises the possibility that he may have viewed the children almost as extensions of himself, perhaps as property within the custody dispute.
Which is a horrifying thought.
Incredibly horrifying. In this tragic mindset, the act could potentially be interpreted as a desperate, horrific attempt to prevent them from being taken away further by the mother or the legal system, or perhaps even as a way to inflict the ultimate pain on the mother.
His reported mental health decline, as observed by his ex-wife and formally recognized by the court, also seems to be a significant contributing factor according to the sources, doesn't it?
It seems highly relevant. Whitney's consistent observations that he was struggling post-military and becoming more unstable, while she initially didn't see him as dangerous, his subsequent actions, particularly his refusal of those court-ordered psychiatric evaluations, point to a potentially deepening psychological crisis.
Right.
The source analysis suggests this crisis likely impaired his judgment, potentially distorting his perception of the situation and contributing to violent or desperate ideation. His non-compliance meant these potential issues went completely unaddressed by professionals.
Now, let's talk about the evidence of premeditation. This is perhaps the most critical and profoundly disturbing piece of information uncovered by the investigation and reported in the sources.
Yes, this detail fundamentally changes the understanding of this crime. It shifts it from a potential act of sudden impulse in a moment of crisis to something potentially far more deliberate.
And what is that evidence?
The sources cite court documents revealing a key piece of evidence. Cell phone records acquired Saturday show that Decker likely visited the area on Thursday prior to picking up the girls for his scheduled visit.
Okay, let's really dissect the significance of that specific piece of evidence.
Yeah.
As presented in the reports. He visited the area before picking them up.
Exactly. This isn't just a minor detail. It's evidence that profoundly alters the timeline and the understanding of his alleged intent. The fact that his cell phone records suggest he was in that remote Icicle Road area on Thursday, before he was even scheduled to pick up the girls on a Friday, it points strongly towards deliberate pre-planning.
So he wasn't just camping there by chance after picking them up. He was likely scouting the location days beforehand.
That's the strong implication. It suggests he chose the remote location where the bodies were later found and potentially planned the events in advance of even picking up the children for the visitation.
So this contradicts any notion that the horrific act was a sudden, impulsive reaction to a moment of crisis or a breakdown that occurred during the visitation itself.
Precisely. This pre-planning, if it holds up through the investigation, fundamentally contradicts the idea of an act driven solely by an immediate, spur-of-the-moment crisis. Instead, it strongly points towards a calculated, deliberate act.
What are the legal implications of this kind of evidence as it relates to the charges he's facing?
Well, this evidence of pre-planning significantly strengthens the first-degree murder charges against him. First-degree murder typically requires the prosecution to prove premeditation, that there was a period of time, however brief, for the defendant to consciously consider and plan the act before carrying it out.
And the cell phone records?
The cell phone records provide compelling, concrete evidence supporting that element of planning and intent, suggesting it existed days before the crime was allegedly committed.
This specific detail, reported in the sources, is just profoundly chilling. It suggests that the decision to commit these acts wasn't a sudden break with reality, but a considered deliberate choice, possibly fueled by all those factors we've discussed: the escalating conflict, his deteriorating state, the restrictions placed upon him. It pushes the timeline of the tragedy back days before the visitation even occurred, suggesting a horrifying level of calculation.
It underscores a depth of intent and deliberation that is truly horrifying to contemplate, drawn directly from those investigative findings reported in the court documents.
Okay, bringing us to the current situation.
Yeah.
The ongoing apprehension efforts and the critical public safety aspect.
Right. As of today, June 3rd, 2025, based on the reports, Travis Decker remains a fugitive from justice. He is legally wanted on those 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of first-degree kidnapping.
And a very large-scale effort is underway to locate him, correct?
Yes. The reports detail a massive multi-agency manhunt that is actively concentrating search efforts in the region where his vehicle was found.
Which agencies are involved?
The agencies mentioned include the Chelan County Sheriff's Office, the Wenatchee Police Department, the FBI, Homeland Security, and specialized SWAT teams like the East Cascade SWAT Team. It's a major operation.
And the focus of the search is specifically concentrated in that rugged terrain where his truck was discovered.
That's right. Search efforts are heavily concentrated in the Okanogan-Wenatchee National Forest area, particularly around Rock Island Campground and up Icicle Road. But they are also actively pursuing leads and searching other potential locations based on any tips received from the public.
And urgent public warnings continue to be issued by law enforcement.
Absolutely. Authorities are repeatedly emphasizing that Decker is a former military member with extensive training. That phrase keeps coming up. While it's technically unknown if he is currently armed, the warning is crystal clear. He may pose a significant risk, and the public is being advised in the strongest possible terms not to attempt to contact or approach him under any circumstances.
And the call to action for anyone with information remains constant and critical.
Yes. Anyone who thinks they might have seen him or has any information whatsoever regarding his potential whereabouts, no matter how insignificant it might seem, is urged to call 911 immediately. Authorities are stressing that no piece of information is too small in a case like this.
Analyzing the challenges inherent in this manhunt, the involvement of all these agencies and the repeated warnings about his training really underscore the unique difficulties faced by law enforcement in this specific case, don't they?
They absolutely highlight that his specialized skills, particularly his wilderness survival and evasion training from his ranger background, are perceived by authorities as making him a highly capable and potentially a very elusive fugitive.
Right. This isn't like a standard search for someone hiding in an urban environment.
Not at all. It's a manhunt for someone potentially utilizing advanced survival techniques in difficult, rugged, mountainous terrain. This significantly increases the complexity, the potential duration, and the resources required for his apprehension.
Finally, let's touch on the impact this tragedy has had on the community, as described in the sources.
Yeah, the sources describe the Wenatchee community as being just profoundly shaken, expressing deep grief and sorrow over the death of Paityn, Evelyn, and Olivia. It's a tragedy that has clearly impacted many, many lives there.
The Wenatchee School District, where all 3 girls were students at Lincoln Elementary, they reacted quickly to support their community, didn't they?
They did. They issued a statement describing it as an absolutely heartbreaking day for the district and the school. Recognizing the trauma, they immediately made counseling services available to students and staff, not just at Lincoln Elementary, but across the district, acknowledging the deep impact this event had on the whole school community.
And the Music Theater of Wenatchee, where the girls participated in their program, they also shared their grief.
Yes, they released a very moving statement remembering the girls who were part of their short Shakespeareans program. They spoke of them, again using that phrase, as shining stars whose joy, creativity, and spirit lit up our stage and our hearts. It really conveyed the specific way they were known and cherished within that artistic community.
Efforts to support the family and community have also begun, according to the reports.
Yes, a GoFundMe campaign was quickly established to provide support for the mother, Whitney Decker, during this just unimaginable time. And additionally, a vigil was held at Memorial Park in Wenatchee, allowing members of the community to come together, mourn collectively, and offer support to each other.
This widespread community reaction, it highlights how deeply this tragedy resonated beyond just the immediate family.
It absolutely does. The profound loss felt by so many classmates, teachers, fellow performers, friends, neighbors, It underscores the broader societal trauma inflicted by such acts of violence. The community's response, from offering counseling to organizing vigils and support funds, it demonstrates the collective need for healing and solidarity in the face of such unimaginable grief. It truly shows the impact these three young lives had on Wenatchee.
Okay, that brings us towards the close of this deep dive into this incredibly difficult case. We've gone through the information provided in the reports and documents, tracing the tragic events from that missed visitation to the grim discovery, examining the backgrounds of those involved, detailing the escalating family conflict and custody dispute documented in the sources, understanding the specific, disturbing manner of death reported.
And highlighting that chilling evidence pointing towards premeditation.
And as the sources make clear, the most critical unresolved element right now is the continued evasion of Travis Decker and the ongoing large-scale manhunt for his apprehension.
That's the immediate focus, absolutely.
And the information we've reviewed points to several intertwined factors that appear central to this tragedy. His reported struggles post-military, the unaddressed mental health issues highlighted by his ex-wife in the court, his unstable living situation including homelessness, and his documented non-compliance with court-ordered evaluations and modifications to the parenting plan.
All those elements seem critically interconnected based on the reporting.
This case, as detailed in the sources, tragically illuminates several potential points of friction within systems designed to protect children and support families. It shows the complex intersection of mental health struggles, high-conflict custody disputes.
Right.
The limitations, perhaps, in initial risk assessment criteria. When faced with deviations from routine and known risk factors, the challenges law enforcement faces in tracking individuals with specialized training, and the critical importance and sometimes tragic failure of compliance with court-ordered interventions.
Yeah.
It leaves us with a difficult question to consider, really for you listening. What can be learned from this documented timeline? This progression of escalating concerns, formal findings, and clear non-compliance. Could anything have been done differently to potentially identify and intervene in similar high-risk situations before they reach such a devastating conclusion?
It's the question that hangs heavy over cases like this. The information presented compels us to consider these layers of factors and their broader systemic implications.
It's a profoundly sad outcome, but one that demands careful consideration of the documented path that led to it, based on the information we have available through these sources.